We were putting together a video about New South Wales, the usual ghost town material, the places that already have postcards, when one name stopped behaving like the others. Wallar, a farming village near Mudgee. Most ghost towns die because a mine closed. Wallar is dying because one opened. A coal company bought the houses, the store, both churches, one at a time, until almost nobody was left. That stopped us. So we kept pulling the thread. One name led to another. 15 places later, here is what we found. We did not expect a village a mine dug up whole, then moved the dead to make room. We did not expect the birthplace of Australian skiing to end as rubble a government crew bulldozed. We did not expect an abandoned tunnel to fill, decades later, with living light. But the one that made us feel we had to make this, a whole town that keeps rising out of a lake, that is number one. Stay with us. This is what we do here. Follow threads other people drop. Subscribe if that sounds like something you want more of. Today, we are counting down 15 New South Wales ghost towns, so forgotten you won't find them on Google Maps. We start in the Blue Mountains at the base of Victoria Pass, about 140 kilometers west of Sydney. Hartley. In 1837, the colony built a courthouse here. Greek Revival, sandstone, 3 separate front doors. One for prisoners, one for the public, one for magistrates. Everyone entered the law by their proper rank. The town grew up around that courthouse to judge convicts and to feed the travelers heading for the Bathurst gold fields. And through the 1850s, it did well. Then, in 1877, the main Western Railway was built between Mount Victoria and Lithgow, and it simply went around Hartley. No disaster, no fire, no flood. The planners drew a line, and the line missed the town. Within a few years, the traffic was gone, and Hartley stopped, frozen at the size it had been. The strange part is inside the old lockup. Convicts, bushrangers, and cattle thieves scratched their names, their crimes and their sentences into the timber cell walls, and you can still read them today. 15 or so buildings survive as a national park's historic site. The courthouse, a church still used for weddings, a cafe. You can pull off the highway straight into another century. A town killed by a railway that couldn't be bothered to stop. Number 14 is a picnic ground now. Tables, a creek, people panning for fun. It is also the exact spot where the Australian gold rushes began. Ophir, about half an hour northeast of Orange, sits where 2 creeks meet. In February 1851, payable gold was found here, and once the word got out, roughly 2,000 diggers arrived within months. Quiet Bush became a maze of shafts and tunnels. Someone named the place Ophir, after the biblical land of gold. The man who got the credit was Edward Hargraves. The government gave him £10,500 and a place in the history books. Here's the thing. Historians aren't sure he found it. He was a promoter, good at being seen. The men who actually did the digging, and an earlier prospector named William Tipple Smith, were pushed to the margins. Tipple Smith died in an unmarked grave. Someone gave him a headstone much later, once the argument had moved on without him. The alluvial gold ran out fast. The diggers chased richer fields, and the birthplace of the rush emptied almost as quickly as it filled. Today it's a reserve. Old workings, a cemetery, a stone obelisk, and people swirling pans in the creek, mostly for the story of it. The place that started everything is a nice spot for a swim. Sunny Corner, up in the coal tableland country between Lithgow and Bathurst, was once the largest silver mine in Australia. In the 1880s, it employed around 700 people, with something like 50 silver, lead, and gold mines packed into the surrounding hills. The township was gazetted in 1885, named after the mining company. Then, Broken Hill's richer body eclipsed it. The ore ran out, and the crowd left. In 2006, the census counted about 626 people here. 10 years later, 92. That is the ordinary part, a mining town that shrank. This is the part that isn't. More than a century after the last shift, the mine is still working, not producing anything, just leaking. New South Wales lists the old workings as a high-risk derelict site because they continue to leach acid and heavy metals into the creek. The hill was stripped of vegetation over 100 years ago and never really recovered. So, there's a small village of around 90 people, an old stamp mill, scattered relics, and a creek you should not drink from, poisoned by a mine that closed before anyone living was born. Most towns get to bury their dead industry. Sunny Corners won't stay buried. Number 12 you have to work for. Dalmorton sits at the end of the old Glen Road, a long dusty drive southwest of Grafton, with no fuel and no phone signal the whole way in. Gold was found around 1861, and the field was declared in 1871. About 50 mines and, reportedly, thousands of people and as many as 13 pubs. Those figures come mostly from travel diaries and local memory, so hold them loosely. What's certain is that the town lived off the only coach road between the coast and the tablelands. When a new highway crossed the range in 1967, that road stopped going anywhere, and Dalmorton was left on a route to nowhere. A few timber shells remain, a cemetery, some old mine shafts, and a few kilometers on, the strange keeper of the place. A stagecoach-sized tunnel, hand-cut through solid rock in the 1860s, still carrying 19th century graffiti on its roof. You will most likely have all of it to yourself. Often there's no other vehicle for an hour. A ghost town so far down the dirt that even the ghosts had to commit. Far northwest, in the corner country north of Broken Hill, gold was found in 1880. Thousands rushed in. The problem was where they rushed to. Milparinka sat in one of the driest corners of the continent, on a creek that mostly wasn't a creek. The population climbed to around 3,000, almost all men, and a goldfields warden was appointed in 1881 to keep order. But the field was patchy and the water almost non-existent. You need water to work alluvial gold and to keep people alive. And within about 2 years, the 3,000 had fallen to roughly 400. They should have known. 35 years earlier, the explorer Charles Sturt had been trapped near here for 6 months waiting for rain, and his second-in-command, James Poole, died in the wait. Poole's grave is still out there by the town. One detail captures the place. The single pub left standing, the Albert Hotel, used to have its beer hauled in by Camel from a brewery in Wilcannia. The Grand Stone Courthouse survives, restored, built for a town that was supposed to last. 9 or 10 people live in Milparinka now. Summers reach 48 degrees. They built a courthouse for the ages in a place that couldn't spare the water to stay. Number 10 was, for a few years, the largest inland town in the colony. They called it the richest quarter-mile in the world. Hillend, near Bathurst, boomed through the 1850s and 60s on reef gold. At its peak in the early 1870s, it held around 8,000 people, 5 banks, 2 newspapers, a brewery, and something like 27 pubs strung along more than a kilometer of shopfronts. And then, in October 1872, the Star of Hope mine cut into something that made the whole world look. The Holterman specimen. A single slab of gold-bearing reef about 1.5 meters tall, 66 centimeters wide, weighing around 286 kilograms, more than 90 of that pure gold. It is still the largest single mass of reef gold ever found. In 1 week in 1872, over 700 kilograms of gold left this town. Here's what makes Hillend different. A photographer named Beaufoy Merlin was working the streets at that exact peak on commission, and he documented the boomtown on glass plates. The shops, the miners, the faces. Those negatives survive in the state library, so we don't have to imagine what emptied out. We can see it, because empty out it did. The easy reef gold gave up around 1874, and the richest quarter-mile in the world hollowed out in about 3 years. 700 people by 1945, 80 by 2017. It's a national park's historic site now. A pub, a general store, a museum, and empty lots with little signs telling you what used to stand there. A town photographed at its absolute peak, so its collapse would have a before. Here's the detail that stopped us on number 9. Most ghost towns are abandoned. Cadia was deleted. South of Orange, Cadia began in the 1860s as a private copper township. Cornish miners, an engine house, the usual arc of copper, then iron, then decline. It should have ended as a quiet ruin. But a century later, one of the largest gold-copper deposits on Earth was found directly beneath the valley, and the modern mine that came for it needed the ground the village stood on. So the village was removed, not left to rot. Removed, swallowed by the open cut and the workings around it. And when a working town cemetery is in the way of a mine, you do the thing that sounds impossible until you read it in the record. The graves were exhumed and the dead were reburied somewhere else. The census tells the whole story in 2 numbers. Population of the Cadia locality in 2016, 0. In 2021, 3. One thing survived. The 1865 Cornish-style engine house, a heritage-listed ruin roofed in 1993 to protect it. It stands on an active, restricted mine lease, which means the last trace of the village is fenced inside the thing that erased it. They moved the dead to get at what was under them. The living had already gone. Number 8 is hidden in a steep valley west of Mittagong in the Southern Highlands. And for a while, it was essentially a piece of Scotland dropped into the Australian bush. In the late 1870s, a company found a rich seam of oil shale here. So rich, it yielded around 590 liters of oil per ton. To work it, they didn't train locals. They imported an entire workforce from the Scottish shale oil districts near Edinburgh. Skilled miners and their families shipped across the world. The part that lingers is the arrangement. In exchange for their passage, those Scottish families were bound to stay and mine for at least 2 years. They arrived owing the company their own arrival. Cut off in its gorge, Joadja became almost a self-contained country. Its own school, churches, shops, a school of arts, and around 1,300 people at its peak. The first mechanical coal cutter in New South Wales was put to work here in 1881. Then, cheaper imported kerosene made the whole enterprise pointless. The mine closed around 1903. By 1911, the Scots had scattered, many to the Hunter coalfields, and the valley was sold off for grazing for £4,400. The sandstone school still stands. So do the miners' cottages, the church, the cemetery, and the heritage-listed shale ovens. It's private land now, with a whiskey distillery and weekend tours through the ruins. They crossed an ocean on a 2-year debt, built a town, and left it to the quiet inside a single lifetime. Quick one before we keep going. If you're enjoying following this rabbit hole with us, drop a like. It helps more people find these places. And tell us in the comments if any of these names ring a bell. Some of you have been to these towns. Some of you grew up in them. We read all of it. Here's the detail that stopped us cold on number 7. The town left behind a tunnel, and the tunnel is now alive. Newnes sat on the floor of the Wolgan Valley, ringed by sheer sandstone cliffs, near Lithgow. In 1906 and 1907, the Commonwealth Oil Corporation built a railway that dropped hundreds of meters off the plateau, through tunnels and gorges, purely to haul oil shale out of a place with no other way in. A town of around 1,600 people grew on the valley floor. A school opened in 1907. The shale business was always marginal. The works ran until about 1932, and in 1940, the railway was pulled up entirely. The rails lifted, the salvageable plant carted off to another shale town down the road. Then, nature took the empty corridor. Tree ferns grew back over the old rail line, and the damp, pitch-black tunnel the trains had abandoned filled with glowworms, the larvae of a native fly that thrives in exactly that kind of dark, still, wet air. About 400 meters of tunnel, now one of the best glowworm colonies in the state, glowing precisely because the industry stopped. The ruins are still spread up the hillside, beehive coke ovens, refinery brickwork, a great retaining wall. The 1907 hotel survives as a kiosk and museum. Wombats graze the flats at dusk. Famously unbothered by anyone, the town made the dark and something else moved in to fill it with light. Number 6 is barely there at all, which is its own kind of story. Kiandra stood at around 1,400 meters in the snowy mountains. For about a century, the highest and coldest town in Australia. Gold pulled up to 10,000 people onto that freezing treeless ridge in 1859 in one of the shortest rushes the country ever had. The field was thin, the winters were savage, and within roughly 18 months, most of the 10,000 were gone. What kept Kiandra alive was the snow. In 1861, snowed-in Norwegian miners cut skis out of fence palings to get around, and in doing so, more or less invented Australian skiing. Ski carnivals were running by the 1870s. The local postman skied his mail rounds. Australia's first T-bar lift went up here in 1957. So it hung on, a mining and skiing outpost, for 100 years. The last resident left in 1974, and here is where it turns. Once the town was empty, the National Park Service took it over and demolished it. Not the weather, not fire, not time. A decision. Nearly the whole township was pulled down, leaving about 4 buildings, and a 2020 bushfire damaged what was left. The demolition still stings the people who remember it. What survives is a heritage precinct. 4 fire-damaged buildings you can't go into, a cemetery, some diggings, a walking trail, and a wind that never really stops. Australian skiing was born on that ridge. The country kept the sport and bulldozed the cradle. Number 5 is under the water. Old Jindabyne was a small pastoral town on the Snowy River, dating back to around the 1840s. Roughly 300 people, a church, a bridge, ordinary lives. Then, the Snowy Mountain scheme decided the valley would be a reservoir. From 1959, the town was frozen. No new building allowed. In 1960, they were told they'd be moved to higher ground. In 1967, the dam was finished, and the water came up over everything they left. The signature detail here is the bridge. Jindabyne had a truss bridge over the Snowy, built in 1893. 74 years old, the thing people had fished from, swum under, sunbaked on their whole lives. When it came time to remove it, they didn't quietly dismantle it. An 8-man army crew blew it up as a training exercise. One longtime resident stood on the bank and watched them do it, and wept. The new town, up the hill on the lake shore, became a thriving ski gateway. Most people who pass through only know that Jindabyne, the busy one, but the old one is still down there. Divers swim through submerged homesteads. The lake runs about 40 meters deep at most, and when drought drops it, roads and foundations climb back into the daylight. They practice demolition on the one bridge a town couldn't bear to lose. Here's the detail that pulled us deeper on number 4. This town wasn't abandoned, it was closed. By the government, on purpose. Glen sits in the Capertee Valley, one of the widest canyons in the world, walled by sandstone cliffs north of Lithgow. It was a wartime gamble. In the late 1930s, with imported fuel under threat, a brand new town was built here for a single purpose: to make petrol out of rock. The shale oil works ran from 1940, and much of the plant was carted in from Newnes, the town up the road that had already failed at the same idea. At its peak, 2,000 to 2,500 people lived here. But the operation was never really profitable, and it was plagued by industrial disputes. A 1948 report found the shale reserves too thin to expand. The government decided to close it, and in 1952 the works shut and were auctioned off. The Labor Council threatened action to stop it. It went ahead anyway, and there's a theory that has never quite died. One historian has argued the closure may have been engineered from abroad, that the American oil giant Texaco quietly lobbied Canberra to shut down Australia's only petrol from shale plant. Presented as a theory because that's what it is. But it's the kind of theory a valley remembers. Around 25 people live at Glen today, beside crumbling retorts and one furnace ruin still standing. There are tours on Saturday afternoons. A whole town built to solve one problem, switched off the moment the problem went away. Number 3 we've already met. It's the town that started this whole search, and it's the only ghost town on this list still being made. Wallar is a farming village northeast of Mudgee, the kind of place that had been quietly farming for generations. In 2006, Peabody's Wilpinjong open-cut coal mine was approved, and it began mining that September. The mine didn't just move in next door, it began buying the town. House by house, the company acquired the village, around 50 houses, the general store, and both churches. Residents tie the buyouts to a specific line in the mine's approval. The noise limits don't apply at a property if the mine has an agreement with the owner. Read that again. It was cheaper to own the houses than to keep the town quiet. So the store and the churches now belong to a coal company, and the company has approval to demolish several houses a year, and it has used it. By recent reporting, only a handful of privately owned homes were left. One count put it at 4. A few owners simply won't sell, as the open cut works closer to their fences, through the dust and the blasting. In 2017, the Planning Commission attached a social impact management plan to the mine, believed to be the first of its kind in the state. A recognition on paper of a community being removed in real time. One resident put it plainly. The company destroyed the town by buying everyone out and putting nothing in its place. Most ghost towns are something that happened. Wallar is something being done. Number 2 took 2,000 people, a dam, and one stubborn family. Yerranderie was a silver town in rugged country near what's now Kiandra Boyd National Park. Silver was found at the peaks in 1871. Commercial mining began in 1899, and the town grew to around 2,000 people. A courthouse, churches, even a silent movie theater, out in some of the roughest country near Sydney. Between 1900 and 1912, the mines pulled out more than 5 million ounces of silver. Its decline came in stages, each one a blow. The First World War drained the young men. An 18-month strike in 1919 and 1920 gutted what was left. The mines closed around 1927. And then came the part that had nothing to do with silver. In 1959, the new Warragamba Dam flooded the Baragarang Valley and drowned Yerranderie's road to Sydney. The town wasn't submerged, it was marooned. Suddenly the only way in was a punishing dirt track. That isolation is exactly what saved it, because nobody could easily reach it, nobody stripped it. From 1947, one family, the Joadjas, bought the whole private township and spent decades restoring it, building by building. The post office, the bank, the courthouse, the church, still standing, still cared for. The country singer Frank Ifield loved the place enough to write a song mourning it. To see it now, you drive about 76 kilometers of dirt. The journey in is half the point. A town that survived because the world made it too much trouble to destroy. Stand on the shore of Lake Yucambane in a dry year. The water has pulled back from the bank, and the mud it leaves behind is not empty. There are lines in it. Straight ones, right angles, the outline of a street. Bend down and there's a piece of crockery, a rusted farm tool, the curb of a road that runs down into the lake and keeps going. That's old Adaminaby, coming up for air. For most of the year it isn't here. It's under about 40 meters of the Snowy Mountains scheme. Adaminaby was a pastoral and gold town, well over a century old, home to around 700 people. In the mid-1950s, the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority chose its valley for the scheme's first and largest reservoir, Lake Yucambane. The town had to go. And here, the story does something the others don't. They didn't just abandon it, they moved it. More than 100 buildings were lifted and trucked about 9 kilometers to a new site. Whole houses and the commercial bank along with them. The first house took 6 days to make the journey. A new Adaminaby was assembled up the road, and it's still there. Around 200 people, a giant fiberglass trout, a museum about the scheme that drowned the old town. Then, in 1957, the water rose over everything left behind. Some people went willingly, some felt cheated, and carried the loss for the rest of their lives, and handed it down to children who never lived there, but grew up knowing exactly which paddock was underneath. Here is the part that made old Adaminaby the one we couldn't stop thinking about. The lake doesn't keep its secret. In the 2007 drought, Lake Ucambine dropped below 20%, and the old town surfaced for the first time in about 50 years. The streets, the foundations, the relics laid out on the silt. Former residents came back and walked the roads of a childhood that had been underwater since before their own children were born. And they did something you could only do here. The old main street runs on a slope down toward the water, so people used it as a boat ramp, reversing their trailers down the road they'd grown up on, launching onto the lake that had swallowed their houses. The whole place is heritage listed now, a drowned landscape, protected. 2 films were made about it, one in 1958 as the town went under, and one in 2001 called Our Drowned Town. Most of the places on this list are gone and staying gone. This one comes back. It waits for a dry year, lifts its streets out of the water, lets the people who loved it walk home for a season. And then the rain returns, the lake fills, and it goes back under to wait again. A town that refuses to finish disappearing. There are more threads. There always are. Every map has a margin, and the margin is full of these. Our favorite is old Adaminaby, because it's the only one that gets to come home, even if only in a drought. Which of these surprised you most, and which thread should we pull next? Tell us below, subscribe, and we'll keep following them.